I never thought pretending to date my best friend would end with him kissing me in the middle of a crowded party. And I definitely didn't expect that kiss to feel real. Like, really real. The worst part? I didn't pull away. It started 3 weeks earlier when Richard burst into my apartment at 9 in the morning, holding 2 iced coffees and looking completely stressed out. "Tell me you're free next weekend," he said before I could even speak. I blinked at him from the couch. "Good morning to you too." "I'm serious, Victor." That got my attention. Richard was usually the calm one between us, confident, relaxed, the kind of guy who could flirt his way out of a speeding ticket and somehow make the cop laugh afterward. We'd been best friends since freshman year of college, and in 4 years, I'd only seen him genuinely nervous a handful of times. I took the coffee from him carefully. "What happened?" He dragged a hand through his dark hair and dropped into the armchair across from me. "My cousin's engagement party is next weekend." "Okay. My ex is gonna be there." I nodded slowly. "Still okay." "She's bringing the guy she cheated on me with." Ouch. Yeah. I finally sat up straighter. "So what do you need from me?" Richard looked at me for a second too long before speaking. "I need you to pretend to be my boyfriend." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What?" He leaned forward quickly. "Just for one weekend, please. My whole family already knows you, and honestly, they already think we act like a couple anyway." I stared at him. My heart was beating way too fast for a conversation that was probably supposed to be funny. "You're kidding." "I'm not." "Richard." "Victor, come on," he groaned. "I'm desperate." I laughed nervously, mostly to hide the fact that this request was doing dangerous things to my brain. Because the truth was simple. I'd been in love with Richard for almost 2 years. He didn't know, obviously. Why would he? As far as Richard knew, I was just his best friend. The guy he watched football with. The guy he dragged to bars after breakups. The guy who helped him assemble IKEA furniture while he complained dramatically for 3 straight hours. And yeah, I was gay. Richard knew that too. But Richard was straight. At least, I thought he was. "Vic?" I realized he was staring at me, waiting for an answer. I forced myself to stay calm. "You want me to fake date you in front of your entire family?" "Yes." "For a whole weekend?" "Yes." "And your plan is what? Hold my hand a little and make your ex jealous?" Richard looked weirdly uncomfortable all of a sudden. "Basically." I laughed again, shaking my head. "This is a terrible idea. Please." That one word came out softer than expected. Richard stood up and walked over to the couch, dropping beside me close enough that our legs touched. "Look," he said quietly. "I know it's weird, but I trust you." That didn't help my heartbeat at all. "You're seriously asking the wrong person to do this." "Why?" "Because I'd absolutely enjoy pretending to be your boyfriend way too much." Instead, I shrugged. "Because I'm gonna embarrass you." Richard grinned. "No chance. You're hot." The words hit me like a truck. He said them casually, too casually. But Richard had always been like that. Touchy, flirty, comfortable in a way that blurred lines sometimes without him realizing it. At least that's what I'd always told myself. "You really are desperate," I muttered. "I'll buy all your drinks for a month." Tempting. "And I'll finally admit your movie taste is better than mine." I gasped dramatically. Now I know this is serious. He laughed, shoving my shoulder lightly, and for a second, things felt normal again. Safe. Then Richard looked at me with this softer expression I couldn't quite read. So you'll do it? I should have said no. Honestly, I should have shut the whole thing down immediately. But sitting there with his knee pressed against mine and his eyes locked on me, I already knew I was screwed. Fine, I sighed. Rich's entire face lit up. You're the best. I know. Before I could react, he grabbed my face with both hands and kissed the top of my head dramatically. Thank you, baby. Baby. I froze. Richard pulled back immediately, not noticing the effect he just had on me. We should practice, he said casually. I blinked. Practice what? Couple stuff. That sounds horrifying. He laughed again. Come on. If we act awkward, my family's gonna know immediately. You've thought way too much about this. Obviously. Then he stood up suddenly and held his hand out toward me. First lesson. I eyed him suspiciously. What now? Boyfriends hold hands. I stared at his hand. This was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. And yet my stomach was already flipping itself inside out. You're enjoying this way too much, I muttered. Richard smirked. Maybe. I rolled my eyes dramatically before finally placing my hand in his. Big mistake. His fingers closed around mine naturally. Warm, strong, comfortable. Way too comfortable. Neither of us spoke for a second. Then Richard squeezed my hand gently, and something shifted, just slightly, enough for me to notice. Enough to make me suddenly very aware of how close we were standing. You're blushing, Richard said quietly. No, I'm not. You definitely are. Shut up. He grinned, but instead of letting go, his thumb slowly brushed against my knuckles once. My chest tightened. That tiny touch shouldn't have felt intimate, but somehow it did. And the scariest part? Richard looked affected too. His expression changed for half a second, something uncertain flickering across his face before he quickly stepped back and cleared his throat. Okay, he said too quickly. Yeah, we're definitely believable. I laughed nervously. Yeah, I said softly. But deep down, I already had a feeling this fake relationship was going to ruin me. By the time the weekend of the engagement party arrived, I was already regretting agreeing to this. Not because I didn't want to spend time with Richard. That was the problem. I wanted it too much. The entire drive to his hometown felt dangerous in a way I couldn't explain. Richard was in an unusually good mood, one hand lazily resting on the steering wheel while music played softly through the car speakers. Meanwhile, I was trying very hard not to stare at him every 5 seconds. You're nervous, Richard said suddenly. I'm trapped in a fake relationship with my best friend. Of course I'm nervous. He laughed. Relax. My family already loves you. That's not reassuring. It should be. I glanced out the window. What exactly did you tell them? Richard hesitated. That hesitation immediately concerned me. Richard. Nothing crazy. Richard. He winced slightly. I might have mentioned we've been seeing each other for a few months. I turned toward him so fast my seatbelt locked. You what? Keep your voice down. You said this was just for the weekend. It is. Then why are we suddenly boyfriends with Lore? Richard burst out laughing so hard he nearly missed the exit. Oh my God, boyfriends with Lore is insane. I crossed my arms. I hate you. No, you don't. Unfortunately, he sounded very confident about that. About an hour later, we pulled into his parents' driveway. And immediately my stomach dropped. Cars everywhere, people everywhere. "This many people are related to you?" I asked weakly. Richard smirked. "Good luck, baby." Then before I could react, he grabbed my hand, just naturally, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The warmth of his fingers instantly short-circuited my brain. Richard leaned closer while leading me toward the house. "You good?" he asked quietly. I nodded too fast. Perfectly normal. Totally not dying. That earned me a soft laugh. The front door opened before we even reached it. "Richard!" A woman rushed outside and immediately hugged him tight. Then her eyes landed on me. "Oh my God," she said dramatically. "Victor!" Richard's mom practically attacked me with affection. I barely had time to breathe before she pulled me into a hug, too. "You're even prettier in person," she whispered loudly. I choked. Richard immediately lost it, laughing behind me. "Mom," he groaned. "What?" she said innocently. "You hid him from us for months." Months. I shot Richard a murderous look. He avoided eye contact entirely. Coward. The next hour was absolute chaos. Cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends. Every single person wanted to meet me. And apparently every single person already knew intimate details about our relationship. "You're the guy Richard won't shut up about. I knew you two would end up together. He smiles differently around you." That last one stayed stuck in my head, especially because Richard got weirdly quiet after his aunt said it. The whole situation should have felt ridiculous. Instead, it felt strangely real. Mostly because Richard never stopped touching me. His hand on my back while introducing me to people. His fingers brushing mine under the dinner table. His arm casually slung around my shoulders whenever someone teased us. Every touch felt effortless, natural, like he genuinely liked having me close. And honestly, that was becoming a serious problem for me. The engagement party itself started that evening at a huge rented lakeside venue just outside town. String lights glowed above the dance floor. Music echoed across the water. Everyone was drinking, including Richard. Especially Richard. "You're staring again," I muttered while we stood near the bar. Richard blinked at me lazily. "What? You keep looking at me weird." He smiled slowly. "You clean up nice, Victor." My face immediately got hot. I tugged at the collar of my button-up shirt awkwardly. "You've seen me dressed up before. Not like this." The way he said it made my chest tighten. Before I could respond, someone walked up beside us. A blonde woman, tall, gorgeous, and judging by the immediate tension in Richard's shoulders, the ex. "Wow," she said, eyes flicking between us. "So it's actually true." Richard's entire demeanor changed instantly. Cooler, colder. "Hey, Melissa." Her gaze landed on me. "You must be Victor." I forced a polite smile. "That's me." She looked me up and down slowly before giving Richard a tight smile. "You move on fast." Richard scoffed softly. "You cheated on me." "Still," she replied, "didn't think you'd end up with a guy." The comment wasn't openly rude, but something about her tone annoyed me immediately. Richard's jaw tightened. Then suddenly, his hand slid around my waist. Not casual anymore. Possessive. "He's better than you ever were," Richard said calmly. My heart nearly exploded. Melissa looked genuinely surprised, then weirdly hurt. She glanced at me one more time before walking away without another word. The second she disappeared into the crowd, Richard exhaled heavily. "Well," I muttered. That was terrifying. Richard laughed softly, but his hand was still resting on my waist, and neither of us acknowledged it. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He nodded once, then finally looked at me. Really looked at me. "You know what the weird part is?" he said. "What?" He hesitated just long enough to make my pulse speed up. "This doesn't even feel fake anymore." The air between us changed instantly. Heavy, charged. My throat suddenly felt dry. Before I could answer, someone yelled Richard's name from across the venue. The moment shattered. He stepped back slightly, running a hand through his hair. "Come on," he said quickly. "My cousins want to do shots." But something about his expression stayed different after that. And later that night, after way too much alcohol and way too many lingering touches, things finally crossed the line. It happened during dancing, which honestly should have been harmless, but Richard was drunk enough to lose some of his usual restraint, and very clingy. "This is your fault," I told him while he dragged me toward the dance floor. "How?" "You're holding my hand again. You love it." I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped, because unfortunately, maybe I did. The music was loud, the crowd packed tight around us. Richard moved closer while laughing at something I said, one hand settling on my hip. Too low. Definitely too low. My entire body went tense, and Richard noticed immediately. His smile faded slightly. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said too fast, but neither of us moved away. If anything, Richard got closer. Close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath. Close enough that our chests brushed accidentally when the crowd shifted. And then, someone behind us shouted, "Kiss him!" Richard froze. I laughed awkwardly. Absolutely not. But his eyes were already on me, locked on mine. The crowd around us started cheering loudly. "Kiss! Kiss! Kiss!" My heart was pounding so hard it physically hurt. Richard looked wrecked suddenly, confused, nervous, like he was fighting with himself internally. "Richard," I started quietly. Then he kissed me, and everything in my brain stopped working. The second Richard's lips touched mine, the entire world disappeared. The music, the crowd, the shouting around us, gone. All I could focus on was him. Warm hands gripping my waist, his mouth against mine. The fact that my best friend was kissing me like he meant it. And maybe the craziest part? Richard kissed like someone who'd wanted to do it for a while. There was hesitation at first, like he expected me to push him away. But when I didn't, something changed. His grip tightened slightly. The kiss deepened just enough to make my knees feel weak. A loud cheer exploded around us. That's what finally snapped us apart. Richard stepped back fast, breathing hard. I stared at him in complete shock. He looked just as stunned. "Vic, I need air," I blurted. Then I immediately turned and pushed through the crowd before my brain completely melted. Cool night air hit my face the second I stepped outside near the lake. My heart was going absolutely insane. I paced along the dock trying to process what had just happened. Richard kissed me. Richard kissed me. Richard kissed me. Every repeat made it feel more unreal. The door behind me opened a minute later. Of course it was him. Victor. I didn't turn around immediately, mostly because I was terrified my face would give away everything. Richard walked slowly onto the dock beside me. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Finally, he exhaled hard. "Okay," he muttered. "I definitely didn't plan that." I laughed nervously without looking at him. "Good to know. Are you mad?" That question surprised me enough to finally turn toward him. Richard looked genuinely worried. Actually worried. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not mad." He relaxed slightly, but the tension between us stayed thick. "What happened back there?" I asked carefully. Richard opened his mouth, closed it again, then rubbed the back of his neck in frustration. "I don't know. That hurt more than it should have." "Oh. No, wait," he said quickly. "That came out wrong." I crossed my arms tightly. "Then explain it better." Richard stared out at the dark lake for a second before speaking. When everyone started yelling at us to kiss, he paused. I realized I wanted to. My chest tightened painfully, and that freaked me out. He finally looked at me again. "You didn't exactly look upset, because I've been in love with you forever." Instead, I forced a weak laugh. "Yeah, well, you're hard to say no to." Richard smiled faintly at that. Then the smile slowly disappeared again. "Victor," he said softly, "be honest with me." That tone immediately made me nervous. "What? Have you ever—" He hesitated. "Ever what?" His eyes searched mine carefully. "Thought about me like that?" Oh, oh no. I looked away instantly, and honestly, that probably answered the question by itself. Richard inhaled sharply beside me. "Vic, you're drunk." "I'm serious." I laughed awkwardly. "This conversation feels dangerous." "Maybe." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. I should have shut it down. I knew that. But standing there alone with him under the lights reflecting off the lake, everything suddenly felt too honest, too real. "I tried not to," I admitted quietly. Richard went very still. "I mean," I rubbed my face nervously. "You're my best friend, and you were straight, so—" "Were?" I blinked. "Right. That slipped out accidentally." Richard noticed immediately. His expression shifted into something unreadable. "You don't think I'm straight anymore?" I swallowed hard. I don't know what to think anymore. Neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us in a way that somehow felt intimate all by itself. Then Richard stepped closer, very slowly. "Can I tell you something?" he asked quietly. My pulse jumped. "Sure. I've kissed people before." I frowned slightly. "Okay. I mean guys." That sentence hit me like ice water. "What?" Richard looked almost embarrassed now. "Not seriously," he said quickly. "Just in college sometimes. Parties. Drunk stuff." I stared at him. "You never told me that." "I know." "Why not?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Because I didn't think it mattered." "But it does matter." "I guess it does now." My mind was spinning so fast I could barely think straight. Richard watched me carefully the entire time. "You want to know the really messed up part?" he asked softly. I nodded once. "That kiss with you felt different." Every nerve ending in my body lit up at once. Dangerous. This entire conversation was dangerous. "Richard, I'm serious." His voice dropped lower. "I can't stop thinking about it." I looked at him helplessly. "You're drunk." "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'm not lying." The air felt too heavy suddenly, too warm. Richard moved even closer until barely a foot separated us, close enough that I could feel his body heat. And for one horrible, incredible second, I thought he might kiss me again. But then the venue doors burst open behind us. "There you are!" Richard's cousin stumbled outside, laughing. "Your mom's looking for you idiots." The moment shattered instantly. Richard stepped back. I did too. And just like that, reality came crashing down again. The rest of the night felt painfully awkward after that. Not bad, just fragile. Every glance lasted too long. Every accidental touch felt loaded. And somehow, being alone together suddenly felt impossible. By the time we finally got back to Richard's childhood home after midnight, I was emotionally exhausted. "I'm gonna shower," I muttered while heading upstairs. Richard nodded from the hallway. "Yeah, okay." That was it. No flirting, no jokes, no mention of the kiss, which honestly bothered me more than if he'd made things weird. After my shower, I stood in the guest room staring at the bed, trying to calm my thoughts. This was a mistake. The whole fake dating thing had officially gone too far. And tomorrow, we'd go home, pretend none of this happened, and eventually things would go back to normal. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Then there was a knock on the door. My stomach dropped immediately. "Yeah?" The door opened slowly. Richard stood there wearing gray sweatpants and an old black t-shirt, hair damp from his own shower. And somehow, he looked even more unfairly attractive than usual. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey." He lingered awkwardly near the doorway, which was already strange. Richard was never awkward with me, until now, apparently. "What's up?" I asked carefully. He looked nervous again. Then his eyes met mine, and my heartbeat immediately sped up. "I can't stop thinking about kissing you," he admitted softly. For a second, I genuinely forgot how to breathe. Richard stood in the doorway watching me carefully, like he was waiting for me to laugh it off or tell him to leave. I did neither. "You should probably stop saying things like that," I said weakly. "Why?" "Because every word out of your mouth is ruining my life." Instead, I shrugged nervously. "Because this whole thing is already messy enough." Richard leaned against the doorframe. "Messy how?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Richard, you kissed me. And you kissed me back." That shut me up immediately. His eyes dropped to my mouth for half a second. I noticed, unfortunately. "I keep replaying it," he admitted quietly. "The whole thing." My chest tightened painfully. "You're gonna wake up tomorrow and regret this conversation." "I don't think I will." The confidence in his voice made my stomach flip. Richard slowly stepped inside the room, closing the door behind him softly. Not all the way, just enough to make my pulse skyrocket. "You know what's weird?" he asked. "What?" "I thought pretending to date you would be easy." I laughed nervously. "Yeah? Turns out we're terrible actors?" "No." His voice softened. "Turns out I liked it too much." The silence after that felt deafening. I could hear my heartbeat. Richard looked nervous again, which somehow made everything feel even more real. Then he sat down slowly on the edge of the bed beside me. Close. Very close. "Talk to me," he said quietly. I rubbed my hands together anxiously. "About what?" "About us." "There is no us." The second the words left my mouth, Richard's expression shifted. Not angry, just disappointed. "That's not what it feels like." God. I looked away quickly. You're confused. Maybe. He paused. But I know I want to kiss you again. That hit hard enough to physically hurt. I laughed softly in disbelief. You really picked terrible timing for personal revelations. Richard smiled a little. Then he reached over and nudged my knee gently with his. The tiny touch sent heat rushing through me instantly. You know what I realized tonight? He asked. I shook my head. I get jealous. My brain completely stalled. What? When Melissa was talking to you earlier, his jaw tightened slightly. I hated the way she looked at you. I stared at him. That's not jealousy, that's just... It got worse later. Richard cut me off while looking down at his hands. When that guy at the bar kept flirting with you, he muttered. I wanted to punch him. I blinked rapidly. What guy? The blonde one. The bartender? Yeah. I almost laughed from sheer disbelief. He was asking if I wanted another drink. He was flirting. You're insane. Probably. But he smiled a little while saying it. Then his smile slowly faded. I don't know what this means, Victor. That was the first truly honest thing he'd said all night, and somehow it made my chest ache, because I didn't know either. Richard had always been affectionate with me, touchy, protective, close. But this felt different, real, and honestly, that terrified me. You don't have to figure everything out tonight, I said quietly. Richard looked at me for a long moment, then softly, Can I ask you something else? Depends. He hesitated just enough to make my stomach tighten again. Have you ever wanted me to kiss you before tonight? I closed my eyes immediately. Oh my God. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. Richard laughed quietly beside me, a nervous laugh this time, not teasing, almost relieved. When I finally looked back at him, he was staring at me differently than before, softer, like he was finally allowing himself to see something that had always been there. You really liked me this whole time? He asked. I groaned dramatically and covered my face. Please stop talking. That's actually insane. I know. How did I not notice? Because you're emotionally stupid? Richard burst out laughing. Then, without thinking, he leaned closer and grabbed my wrist gently, pulling my hands away from my face. And suddenly we were very close again. Too close. Neither of us moved. His fingers were still loosely wrapped around my wrist. Warm, careful. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could feel it. You know what's really messing with my head? Richard asked quietly. I swallowed. What? I don't think I'm pretending anymore. The air left my lungs slowly, and before I could stop myself, I kissed him. This time it wasn't accidental, wasn't pressured by a crowd, wasn't part of the act. It was just me. And Richard responded instantly, like he'd been waiting for it. His hand slid up my arm while kissing me back harder this time, more confident now. And the soft sound he made against my mouth nearly destroyed me. Everything about him felt warm, safe, familiar in a way that somehow made this even more intense. Because this wasn't some random guy. This was Richard, my best friend, the person who already knew everything about me. And somehow, kissing him felt terrifyingly natural. His fingers moved to my waist slowly, pulling me closer across the bed. I could feel his heartbeat too now, fast, really fast. We finally pulled apart, breathing unevenly. Neither of us spoke immediately. Richard just stared at me like he was trying to process what had happened. Then quietly, "Okay, wow." I laughed shakily. "Yeah, that was..." He exhaled hard. "Definitely not fake." "Nope." Richard looked completely overwhelmed now, and honestly, I probably looked the same. Then suddenly he laughed under his breath and shook his head. "What?" "You realize this changes everything, right?" My stomach flipped nervously. "Probably." He looked at me carefully for another second, then softer. "You scared?" I thought about lying. Instead, I nodded. "Yeah." Richard's expression immediately softened, and then he did something that almost hurt more than the kissing. He reached over and intertwined our fingers slowly, gentle, intentional. "I'm scared too," he admitted quietly. The honesty in his voice hit me harder than anything else tonight. And for the first time since this fake dating disaster began, I realized something terrifying. Richard wasn't playing with me. He was falling apart over this too. I barely slept that night. Not because anything else happened. Honestly, that was part of the problem. After we kissed again, Richard stayed beside me for almost an hour, just talking quietly like we always did. Except now, every glance felt loaded. Every accidental brush of his hand made my pulse jump. At one point, he rested his head against my shoulder while we sat there in silence. Just naturally, like he belonged there. And I think that scared both of us more than the kissing. Eventually, Richard stood up slowly. "I should probably go before my family catches me sneaking into my boyfriend's room." I laughed softly. "Fake boyfriend." He looked at me for a second too long. "Right," he said quietly. That one word sat painfully in my chest after he left, because neither of us really believed it anymore. The next morning was somehow even worse, or better. Honestly, I couldn't tell anymore. I walked downstairs half awake, expecting things to be awkward after last night. Instead, I found Richard in the kitchen making coffee while wearing gray sweatpants that should honestly be illegal. The second he looked up and saw me, his expression softened automatically, like it was instinct. "Morning," he said, and somehow that sounded more intimate than the kissing. "Morning." There was this weird pause where neither of us knew what to do now. Then Richard smiled slightly and held out a coffee mug toward me, made exactly the way I liked it. My chest hurt instantly. "You remembered." "You act like I haven't known you forever." I took the mug carefully, our fingers brushing for half a second. Richard noticed. I noticed him noticing. This was becoming a serious issue. Before either of us could say anything else, his mom walked into the kitchen and immediately froze. Her eyes moved between us once. Then she smiled way too knowingly. "Oh," she said casually. "So something definitely happened." I nearly inhaled coffee directly into my lungs. "Mom," Richard groaned. "What?" she replied innocently while grabbing orange juice from the fridge. "You two look disgusting." "We do not." "You're looking at each other like you're in a Nicholas Sparks movie." Richard burst out laughing while I stared at the floor, wishing for death. His mom pointed directly at me, and Victor's blushing. Traitorous face. "Leave him alone," Richard said immediately. The protectiveness in his voice made her eyebrows lift slightly. Then a very smug smile spread across her face. "Oh, this is serious, serious." "Mom." She laughed and walked away before either of us could recover. The second she disappeared, Richard leaned against the counter beside me. "Well," he muttered. That's horrifying. You defended me. He blinked. Obviously? The fact that he sounded confused by the observation somehow made it worse. Like protecting me was automatic for him, like he didn't even think about it. My feelings were getting violently out of control. The drive home later that afternoon felt completely different from the drive there. Quieter. Not awkward exactly. Just careful. Like both of us were scared to ruin whatever this had become. Richard kept glancing at me while driving. Every single time our eyes met, tension filled the car instantly. Finally, about halfway home, he sighed heavily. We need to talk. That sentence has never led to happiness. Richard laughed softly. Then his expression turned serious again. What are we doing? There it was, the terrifying question. I stared out the window for a second before answering honestly. I have absolutely no idea. Helpful. I'm serious, Richard. I looked over at him finally. You spent years thinking you were straight. I spent years trying not to be in love with you. This is kind of a disaster. Fair. But, I added carefully, I don't think last night felt fake to either of us. Richard's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. No, he admitted quietly. It didn't. Silence settled again. Then he surprised me. What if we stop pretending? I frowned slightly. What does that mean? Richard glanced at me briefly before looking back at the road. I mean, he hesitated. What if we actually try this? My heart nearly stopped. You can't just casually say things like that. I'm trying here. No, I know, but Richard, this is huge. I know. You could wake up next week and realize you panicked after your breakup and accidentally turned your best friend into an emotional crisis. Richard laughed so suddenly he had to wipe his eyes. That's a horrible sentence, but accurate. He shook his head, still smiling a little, then softer. I know this is real, Victor. The confidence in his voice made my chest tighten. How? Richard thought for a second. Because I've never looked at anyone the way I look at you. I forgot how to function for a moment. He continued before I could recover. And honestly, I think I felt something for a while. He exhaled shakily. I just didn't let myself think about it too hard. I stared at him. You're telling me you had an identity crisis because of me? Richard smirked slightly. That sounds dramatic. It is dramatic. You are very pretty, to be fair. I covered my face immediately while he laughed. Stop flirting with me while driving. Can't help it anymore, apparently. That sentence stayed stuck in my head the rest of the drive. By the time we got back to our apartment building, my emotions were completely wrecked. And somehow Richard looked just as overwhelmed. We walked upstairs together in silence. At my apartment door, both of us stopped awkwardly, neither moving, neither leaving. This is weird now, I muttered. A little. You kissed me like 12 hours ago. Twice. Thanks for making it worse. Richard grinned. Then his smile slowly faded again while he looked at me carefully. Can I take you on an actual date? The question hit me so hard I physically froze. Not mess around. A date. Richard looked nervous, waiting for my answer, which honestly melted whatever resistance I had left. You're serious? Very. I laughed softly in disbelief. You know, most people don't realize they like their best friend this aggressively. Well, most people are cowards. That made me laugh harder. And suddenly, Richard relaxed too, smiling at me in that warm, familiar way that always ruined me. Then quieter. So is that a yes? I stepped closer before I could overthink it. close enough that his breathing changed slightly. "Yeah," I said softly. "It's a yes." Richard looked genuinely happy, not relieved, happy. And before either of us could stop ourselves, he leaned down and kissed me again. Slow this time, gentle, the kind of kiss that didn't feel rushed or panicked anymore, just real. When we finally pulled apart, Richard rested his forehead lightly against mine, and in the softest voice imaginable, he whispered, "Thank God." Our first real date was supposed to be simple. That was the plan anyway. Dinner, drinks, maybe a walk afterward. Something normal. But nothing about me and Richard felt normal anymore. By the time Friday night arrived, I was more nervous than I'd been in years, and apparently Richard was too. He picked me up from my apartment, even though we literally lived in the same building. "You're an idiot," I said the second I opened the door. Richard leaned casually against the hallway wall, hands in his jacket pockets. Wanted to do this properly. The stupid butterflies in my stomach immediately started again. "You know we could have just walked downstairs together." "Too late now," he grinned. "Go along with the romance, Victor." I rolled my eyes dramatically before stepping out into the hallway. Then Richard looked at me, really looked at me, and his expression changed instantly. "What?" I asked nervously. "You look," he exhaled softly. "Wow." My face got hot immediately. "You've seen this shirt before." "Yeah, but now I know I'm allowed to stare." That should not have affected me as much as it did. But somehow hearing Richard openly flirt with me still felt surreal, especially because he looked unfairly attractive tonight too. Dark jeans, black jacket, hair pushed back slightly, like he'd actually put effort into this, into me. That realization hit hard. The restaurant itself was small and dimly lit, tucked between a bookstore and a wine bar downtown. Somewhere Richard apparently picked because it looked like a place Victor would secretly love, which honestly was terrifyingly accurate. "You've thought way too much about this," I muttered while we sat down. Richard looked smug. "I pay attention. You remembered my favorite food. You talk about pasta like it saved your life. It practically did during college." He laughed softly, and just like that, some of the nervousness faded. That was the dangerous thing about Richard. He still felt like my best friend, even now, maybe especially now. Conversation flowed easily through dinner, movies, work drama, dumb memories from college. At one point, Richard laughed so hard at one of my stories, he reached across the table and grabbed my hand automatically. Neither of us acknowledged it right away, but neither of us let go either. My chest hurt in the best possible way. "You know what's weird?" Richard said quietly after a while. "What?" "I thought dating you would feel completely different." I frowned slightly. "Different bad?" "No." His thumb brushed against my knuckles gently. "Different impossible." That made my heartbeat stutter. "But honestly," he continued softly, "it just feels like us." I stared at him for a second too long, then smiled helplessly. "Yeah," I admitted, "it kinda does." Richard's expression softened instantly, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, like two idiots realizing something huge way too late. After dinner, we ended up walking through downtown together while the city glowed around us. Cold air, streetlights, music drifting from bars nearby. Richard walked close enough that our shoulders kept brushing. Neither of us moved away. At some point, his hand found mine naturally, like it belonged there. And honestly, it kind of did. You realize our friends are going to lose their minds when they find out, I said. Richard snorted. Dylan already thinks we're secretly married. That man has been shipping us for years. He's going to be unbearable. I laughed, then quieter. Are you okay with this? Richard looked over immediately. With what? People knowing. His expression softened again. Victor. He squeezed my hand gently. I'm okay with you. God. He kept saying things that felt unfairly sincere. We stopped outside a little bookstore window while snow started drifting lightly from the sky. Richard tilted his head upward slightly. No way. What? It's snowing. I laughed softly. You say that like you've never seen snow before. It's romantic snow. That's not a thing. It is on dates. I shook my head, smiling. Then Richard looked at me again, and suddenly the teasing faded from his expression completely. The city noise around us blurred into the background. You know, he said quietly, I was really scared you'd say no. To the date? To all of this. The honesty in his voice hit me immediately. I almost did. Richard blinked. Seriously? I mean, yeah, I laughed softly. You're my best friend. If this went badly, I'd lose you. You won't. The certainty in his answer made my chest tighten. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. I looked at him carefully. Richard. He stepped closer. Snowflakes landed in his dark hair while he spoke softly. I'm not going anywhere, Victor. The way he said my name nearly destroyed me. Warm, certain, real. Before I could respond, Richard reached up slowly and brushed snow from my jacket collar. Such a tiny gesture, but intimate in a way that made my stomach flip. You know what I realized this week? He murmured. What? I've always looked for you first. I stared at him. At parties, in crowds, anywhere. He smiled faintly. Didn't matter who I was talking to. I'd still look around for you automatically. Every word felt dangerously genuine. And I think, he admitted quietly, some part of me always knew you were different. My throat tightened. Richard. He shook his head softly. I know this is fast. I know technically I'm having the world's most dramatic identity crisis. I laughed despite myself. But I mean it, he continued. I want this. The emotion in his eyes made it impossible to look away. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Richard wasn't experimenting. He wasn't confused anymore. He was falling for me. Hard. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed the front of his jacket and kissed him. Right there on the sidewalk, under falling snow. Like the cliché romantic idiots we'd apparently become. Richard kissed me back instantly, one hand sliding to my waist while the other cupped my jaw gently. Slow, warm, careful. Like he was still amazed he was allowed to touch me this way. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing unevenly. Richard rested his forehead lightly against mine again, smiling softly. You know, he murmured, I used to think you were way out of my league. I stared at him in disbelief. You cannot be serious. I'm very serious. You look like a man written by women. Richard burst out laughing loud enough that people walking past glanced over. And somehow that laugh, comfortable, genuine, happy, hit me even harder than the kissing. Because for the first time since this all started, neither of us looked scared anymore. The next few weeks felt unreal, in the best way possible. Dating Richard turned out to be strangely easy for two people who accidentally fell in love during a fake relationship, which honestly annoyed both of us a little. "You mean to tell me," I said one night while lying across his couch, "we wasted 2 years being idiots?" Richard looked up from his phone. In my defense, I thought I was straight. "You stared at me like you wanted to climb me." He considered that seriously. Fair point. I threw a pillow at him. Things settled into something warm after that. Natural. Richard started staying at my apartment more often than his own. We cooked together, fell asleep watching movies together, argued over dumb things like whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It felt domestic in a way that should have terrified me. Instead, it made me ridiculously happy. And Richard? Richard became unbelievably affectionate once he stopped holding himself back, always touching me somehow. Hand on my back, arm around my waist, fingers intertwined with mine whenever we walked somewhere together. Like he couldn't believe he was finally allowed to. One night, after we'd been officially dating for about a month, Dylan cornered me during a group hangout. "I need you to be honest with me," he said seriously. I already hated where this was going. "What? When exactly did you two start secretly wanting to bang?" I nearly choked on my drink. Across the room, Richard burst out laughing immediately. "Dylan," I groaned. "No, because this makes too much sense," he continued dramatically. "You idiots were basically flirting for years." Richard looked completely unapologetic. "I honestly thought everyone knew," he admitted. I stared at him. "You didn't even know." "True." Then he looked at me with that soft, stupid smile that kept ruining my life. "But apparently I was obsessed with you anyway." Dylan gagged loudly. "You're disgusting now." "Yeah," Richard replied happily. "It's great." And honestly, it was. That was the scary part. I'd spent so long convincing myself wanting Richard was hopeless that actually having him still didn't feel fully real sometimes, especially during quieter moments, like waking up beside him, or feeling him reach for my hand automatically while half asleep, or hearing him call me baby without thinking. Every single time it affected me. One Friday night, Richard and I ended up back at the same lakeside venue where his cousin's engagement party happened. Another family event. Apparently, his family adored me now, which was dangerous because his mother had become absolutely unbearable. "Oh, good," she said the second we arrived. "My sons are here." Richard blinked. "Sons? You're basically married emotionally." I nearly walked directly back into the lake. Richard just laughed while wrapping an arm around my waist. "You hear that?" he whispered against my ear. "We're emotionally married. Your family is insane. You love them." Unfortunately true. Later that night, after most people moved inside for dancing, I slipped outside onto the dock for some quiet. The lake was calm again, lights reflecting across the water exactly like the night Richard kissed me for the first time. Funny how much could change in a month. Footsteps sounded behind me. I smiled before even turning around. "Hey." Richard walked over beside me, wearing that familiar, soft expression that only seemed to exist when he looked at me now. "There you are. You were gone for like 4 minutes. Longest 4 minutes of my life." I rolled my eyes affectionately. Richard leaned against the railing beside me. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he looked out across the lake quietly. "You know this is technically your fault." I laughed softly. "What is?" "This whole thing." "How exactly?" "You agreed to fake date me." "You asked me." "Yeah, but you could have said no." I grinned slightly. "You would have been devastated." "Correct." The honesty in his answer made my chest warm instantly. Then Richard got quieter. I think some part of me hoped this would happen. I turned toward him slowly. "What?" He shrugged a little, looking almost embarrassed. "I didn't realize it at the time, obviously." He laughed softly. "But when I asked you to come with me that weekend," his eyes met mine, "you were the only person I wanted there." The emotion in his voice hit me immediately. "You really had no clue before all this?" I asked carefully. Richard thought for a second, then smiled faintly. "I think I knew you mattered differently." That sentence alone nearly destroyed me. He stepped closer slowly. And honestly, his voice dropped softer. "That first kiss wasn't the moment I realized I wanted you." My heartbeat sped up instantly. "No?" Richard shook his head. "It was earlier." "When?" He smiled while looking down briefly. "The first time you held my hand." Oh, I actually stopped breathing for a second. "You got emotional over hand-holding?" "It was intimate." I laughed hard enough that he started laughing too. Then suddenly Richard grabbed my waist and pulled me closer against him. Warm, solid, home. "You know," he murmured, "I'm really glad Melissa cheated on me." I stared at him in horror. That's an insane sentence, but accurate. "Richard, I'm serious." His smile softened. "Because otherwise, I never would have asked you to come with me." The air between us shifted quietly. Not tense anymore, certain. And standing there by the lake with his arms around me, I realized something that honestly felt impossible a month ago. I wasn't scared anymore either. "I love you," I said before I could overthink it. Richard froze, completely froze. Then slowly, "Wait," he whispered. "Really?" I blinked at him. "That's your response?" "No, I just—" He laughed breathlessly. "Victor, I've been trying not to say it for like 2 weeks." My chest physically hurt. Richard looked genuinely overwhelmed now. Then he cupped my face with both hands carefully, eyes locked on mine. "I love you too," he said softly. And somehow those 4 words felt even more intense than the first kiss. Like everything finally clicked into place. Richard smiled helplessly afterward, forehead resting against mine. "You know what the craziest part is?" "What?" "We were pretending for like one day." I laughed. "Honestly, less." "Yeah." He kissed me softly once. "I think I was doomed the second you held my hand." And standing there with my best friend, my boyfriend, holding me under the lights reflecting off the lake, I realized something simple. Maybe the reason pretending felt so real was because we'd already belonged to each other long before either of us admitted it. A week after Richard told me he loved me, his entire family somehow became even more unbearable, especially his mother. "She's planning our wedding already," I muttered while standing in Richard's kitchen one morning. Richard looked up from making coffee. "Beach ceremony or dramatic castle?" I'm leaving you. No, you're not. Unfortunately, he sounded very sure about that. Mostly because at this point we'd basically merged into one person's routine. Half my clothes were at his apartment. He had a toothbrush at mine, and every night somehow ended the same way, tangled together on the couch while pretending to watch something neither of us paid attention to. It still amazed me how quickly Richard adapted to all of this. Not just dating me, loving me openly. Like once he finally let himself cross that line emotionally, there was no hesitation left. One night while we were grocery shopping, he casually kissed my forehead while comparing pasta sauces. An older woman nearby smiled at us, and Richard didn't even notice he'd done something that would have terrified him 2 months ago. That hit me harder than I expected, because this wasn't temporary confusion anymore. This was just him now. Us. And honestly, I'd never seen Richard happier. "You're staring again," he said while tossing vegetables into the cart. "You're domestic." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "You kissed me over marinara sauce." "Yeah?" He grinned. "You're cute near carbohydrates." I laughed so hard people turned around. Later that night, after dinner and a failed attempt to assemble cheap furniture together without arguing, we ended up lying in bed talking quietly in the dark. Richard traced lazy circles against my stomach underneath my shirt, while I tried very hard to focus on speaking normally. "You know what still messes with me?" I admitted. "What?" "You almost dated like 30 women before realizing you liked me." Richard laughed softly against my shoulder. "In my defense, you're very confusing." "How?" "You look innocent." He kissed my neck lightly. "Then you say things that make me want to climb you." My entire brain short-circuited immediately. "Richard." "What?" "I'm being emotionally honest." "You're being illegal." He laughed harder, pulling me closer. God, I was so gone for him. After a quiet moment, Richard's voice softened again. "I really am sorry, though." I frowned slightly. "For what?" "That it took me so long." The sincerity in his tone made my chest ache. I turned toward him carefully in the dark. "Hey." My fingers brushed his jaw gently. "You got here." Richard looked at me for a second like that sentence genuinely affected him. Then he kissed me slowly, different from our early kisses. Less desperate now, more certain, like he knew exactly where he belonged. When we pulled apart, Richard rested his forehead against mine. "You know what's funny?" he murmured. "What?" "That first night at the party?" He smiled softly. "I was terrified after I kissed you." "I noticed." "No, like genuinely panicking." He laughed quietly. "Because the second it happened, I realized I didn't want it to stop." My heartbeat slowed warmly against my ribs. "And honestly," he admitted, thumb brushing my cheek, "that scared me more than realizing I liked guys." I smiled softly. "Why?" "Because losing you would have destroyed me." That hit painfully deep. I stared at him for a long moment before speaking quietly. "You never were gonna lose me." Richard kissed me again immediately after that, like he couldn't help himself. And maybe he couldn't. A month later, Richard's cousin finally got married, which meant one thing: slow dancing. Unfortunately for me, Richard had become aggressively affectionate in public by now. "Dance with me," he demanded while pulling me toward the floor. "I don't slow dance." "You literally danced with me before." "That was fake dating." Richard grinned. "Pretty sure we skipped the fake part." "Fair." The ballroom lights glowed softly while couples moved around us. Richard wrapped his arms around my waist naturally, pulling me close. And honestly, it felt ridiculously right. You know, I murmured against his shoulder, this whole thing is still insane. What thing? You going from straight to wanting to marry me emotionally? Richard snorted loudly. Then he leaned back slightly just to look at me. I need you to understand something. That sounds threatening. The second you held my hand that first day, his expression softened immediately. I was done for. My chest tightened hard. You're so dramatic. Says the guy who looked at me like I invented love after one kiss. I hate you. No, you don't. Same self-assured confidence as always, except now he earned it. The song slowed further around us. Richard's hand settled more firmly against my waist while he looked at me with that same expression that still melted me every time. Soft, certain, completely in love. You know what the best part is? He asked quietly. What? I got my best friend too. That almost hurt to hear, because he was right. That was the real reason this worked. Underneath all the tension and confusion and accidental feelings, we already knew each other better than anyone else ever could. The romance came later. The friendship was always there first. Richard smiled suddenly like he'd remembered something. Oh my God. What? You realize our entire relationship started because I wanted to make my ex jealous. I laughed immediately. That's deeply embarrassing for you. She's probably furious this accidentally worked out. Honestly, I grinned. Good. Richard laughed softly before pulling me closer again. Then quieter. I'd fake date you all over again. The warmth in his voice hit me immediately. I looked up at him carefully. You know, I said softly, you probably could have just asked me out normally. Richard considered that seriously. Nah, he smiled slowly. Kissing you dramatically in front of 200 people had more flair. I rolled my eyes, then kissed him anyway. And this time, when Richard kissed me back beneath the warm wedding lights, with his arms wrapped tightly around me, nothing about it felt confusing anymore. Not the fake dating, not the first kiss, not the years of tension before we figured ourselves out. Because in the end, the truth was painfully simple. My best friend kissed me while we pretended to date. And somewhere between pretending and falling apart, we accidentally became everything each other needed.